This is the first Sunday after Epiphany. And like the season after Pentecost, the Sundays between Epiphany and Lent are designated in the church's liturgical calendar to be what's called normal time. Neither feast nor fast, neither celebration nor penance, just normal time. It's clear, however, from the events this week that we are not in normal times. I usually don't preach about what are called current events. I try rather to discern how our faith can offer both a refuge from and a perspective on these current events. Our faith tradition spans millennia, is present in many, many cultures. And it can help us look behind and look beyond our attention deficit disordered, media-stoked political passions to the presence of the kingdom in the kaleidoscopic experience of God's eternal now. Christianity is not simply some alternative conspiracy theory where there's someone in charge and someone to blame. I'd pretty much finished a whole different sermon by last Wednesday noon, centered on the readings we have for today. This first Sunday after Epiphany, in all 3 years of our cycle of readings, tells about the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist in the River Jordan. And that's an event that I find very interesting. Unlike many, maybe most of the stories we read in the Gospels, this one I think is pretty much close to what we would call historical fact. My reasoning on that is that since John's baptism was for the remission of sins, it was awkward for the church to talk about Jesus being baptized, while at the same time they were saying that Jesus never sinned. It must have been that everybody knew it had happened. So they had to address it and give some explanation. This year's readings present the baptism in the context of spirit, connecting it with the spirit in creation. The word that's translated in the translation we use in the lesson from Genesis today, the wind of God that swept over the face of the waters before God said, "Let there be light," also means spirit. In this case, is usually translated as spirit. The Spirit of God swept over the waters. And in the reading from the book of Acts, we hear Luke describe a coming of the Spirit in a Christian kind of baptism that he says is beyond the baptism of John, accompanied by some very interesting so-called gifts of the Spirit, the speaking in tongues, prophesying. Strange in our experience, mostly, but kind of fascinating to read about. But when I read through that sermon later Wednesday night, it seemed to me like Mr. Magoo walking blindly down the road with bombs going off on the fields next to the road and with fires raging on the far off ridges, but coming closer and closer. Some of you know what that's like. Magoo walks on. The word epiphany means showing forth some kind of divine manifestation, in this case of Jesus. In the baptism today, next week we'll read about the wedding at Cana. At the end of this season, we'll hear about the transfiguration of Jesus speaking with Elijah and Moses on the mountain. It began with the wise men on Epiphany itself. 12th night, January 6th. January 6th. Which saw more than the showing forth of the divine child. Something else was manifest, at least in this country. A deep, very deep wound, a very deep divide. The actions and reactions leading up to insurrection call into question not only our faith in e pluribus unum, but our capacity as the church to address the world in front of us, to share our faith in Jesus, to share our faith of hope and love. We have treated, I think, faith as a conspiracy theory, and an alternate reality we can turn to in need, regularly visit on Sunday mornings on Zoom. Or maybe it's just a kind of religious support for what we really believe. Some evangelical racist nationalism, for example, or liberal privileged humanism, justifying our prejudice as if it comes from God. But faith isn't some component of a worldview or lifestyle. It's everything or nothing. It's our ultimate concern and absolute truth, or base hypocrisy and a self-serving lie. The lessons today speak to that issue. Luke in the book of Acts, I think, is wrong about spirit. It's not the way, for example, that Paul tells it when he gives the story. It isn't some power we're given to use, accompanied by wonders to make us feel special. Luke presents, I think, the viewpoint held rather by Paul's opponents that he was writing to at Corinth. They claimed to be the strong. The rules didn't apply to them. They didn't have to care for the weak or the oppressed because they had all the answers. And their will was what counted. Paul said no to that. Faith, hope, and love abide. The letter to the Ephesians says rather to empty ourselves, to become weak, not strong, to recognize our limits and own up to the fact that we don't have all the answers. We don't even know the questions. The early church should not have been afraid of the Christological implications of Jesus' baptism by John. If God becoming human is to mean anything at all, it must include the experience of repentance and forgiveness that's so central to our faith and so necessary for life. Acknowledgement of the feeling of being very, very lost. We are very lost as a nation, most surely. No matter what side we think that we're on, no matter what spin we put to events. And acceptance of that is where we have to begin. That's hard. That's challenging. But just look back at the lesson from Genesis today to begin with some hope. The Spirit may not be some power to use, given at baptism, accompanied by wonders, but it was there in the beginning, before there was light. It's the water we swim in, an ambient grace in which we live and move and have our being. Spirit is everywhere. Spirit is in everything. Even in anger and violence and hate. The light and the dark. If we see the right way, see through and transcend, Spirit holds all of us in the loving arms of God, holds our fear, holds our pain, holds our uncertainty and confusion. We are not in this alone. This country desperately needs what we have to give it. We'd better start figuring out what that is. Even this day, even last Wednesday, is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Thanks be to God.